I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press, and this is Ground Game. I'm Julie Pace.
And I'm Ralph Russo. From the Associated Press, this is Ground Game Inside the Outbreak.
Every day, Ralph will be bringing you coronavirus coverage straight from the breakout zones.
The coronavirus pandemic ranks among the most dynamic and widespread stories ever covered here at the AP, and we've got you covered from every part of the globe.
Today, we're in Washington, D.C., talking about the latest in the federal government and the White House's response to the pandemic.
Yeah, thanks for joining me to give us our politics fix, Julie. It's become like a bi-weekly thing for us, so again, appreciate your time. The most important thing rolling around Washington, and I believe there's going to be a vote later today, we are talking on Friday, May 15th, the morning of Friday, May 15th, is a vote on a $3 trillion stimulus package in the House. So there's a bunch of interesting things going on here. First, let's start with what's in it.
Sure. So $3 trillion is the top line number, a really just astronomical amount of money that we're talking about here. 1/3 of this bill is aimed at helping state and local governments. One of the things we've just been hearing increasingly across the country is the strain that state and local governments are under. They are major employers. They also obviously provide a huge amount of public services in communities. And they also have a really robust role in public health response. So the exact sort of things that people are looking for right now from their state and local governments are really under strain. And we've seen, this apply to red states and blue states. There's not really a political divide over the financial impact. So Democrats in the House are trying to plunge more money into these state and local governments, $1 trillion. The other things I would note in this package, this is a package, again, it's a Democratic package. It's a package that is really focused on individuals. It's not a package that is focused on businesses. So we see another effort to send direct checks to Americans. It's another package aimed at frontline workers, trying to give them a little extra money. Those people who are having to be out and working, who can't social distance, who can't stay at home right now. The way I would look at this whole package, though, is it is a messaging bill from Democrats. It's sort of an opening gambit. It's a way to say to Republicans, here are our priorities. Now you come back with yours. And I think it's also a way for Democrats to try to, make themselves look like they're the ones on the side of working Americans and leave it to Republicans to be the ones to throw in requests for industry and for big businesses.
So it's a signaling by the Democrats, but it also looks like, at least early on, that not necessarily all Democrats are completely on board, or will they be on board by the time the vote is taken?
Yeah, so our expectation is that this is going to pass. Nancy Pelosi, in my experience in Washington, never really goes to the floor with a bill unless she knows she's got the votes. But I do think, we're starting to see some Democrats who are resistant to both the big eye-popping $3 trillion number and also just the process, because Democrats knew that this was a bill that Republicans in the Senate were not going to take up. They really rushed it through. This is a bill that was introduced earlier this week. It's going to pass on a Friday. It didn't go through the normal committee process. It didn't go through, a lot of the vetting and a lot of the real, even intra-party negotiations that you might normally see. And so even though it was meant to just sort of lay down a marker, you could very easily see the fact that you rushed through $3 trillion in government spending being used against, more moderate Democrats in districts where, fiscal discipline remains, a real calling card. So you're going to start to see some moderates, I think, peel off, but also some liberals, on the left who are uncomfortable with some of the ways that this bill has been rushed through. But we do expect that Pelosi does have the votes to get it done.
So lastly, this vote is being done in person. How is that going to work while adhering to social distancing guidelines?
It's going to mean that this happens very slowly. So basically, what they're doing in the House right now is they are voting in waves. So you come in with a small group of lawmakers, you cast your vote, and then you leave. So it's a long process. I mean, a several hour long process. Interestingly, what is also happening in the House today is that they are expected to vote on measures to remake the rules to allow for remote voting. This is something they've been talking about for several weeks. They just haven't quite gotten over the finish line on it. But we do expect that we will have a plan in place so that they don't have to go through this wave system and this frankly, kind of uncomfortable process for a lot of them, where they're having to get on airplanes and fly back to Washington and gather with other members of the caucus, in person at a time when many of them are recommending that their own constituents do exactly the opposite of that.
Not to mention, a lot of lawmakers are in the group that would be considered somewhat high risk here. So yes,
Absolutely.
putting them in this position is a little bit precarious. I want to focus our attention to the president, President Trump, and some of his supporters have had a lot of time this week, or spent a lot of time this week, talking about retired General Mike Flynn and unmasking by the intelligence community, the Russia probe, maybe more so that than the pandemic. How much of this is an attempt to divert some attention away from the public health crisis?
Yeah, I think quite a bit of it is, frankly, the president has just been battered by a constant stream of bad news on about the pandemic, about the economic situation. And he has seen, in internal polling from his campaign, he's seen that his standing is slipping. And the president, when he has his back against the wall, has sort of one playbook, which is to rev up the base, which is to get his hardcore supporters really motivated. And there are a couple of ways that he does that. One of them is with immigration, and one of them is with Barack Obama. And he is using that second person to really get his base going. He's digging back into a time period where there was a lot of suspicion in the Obama administration about the incoming Trump administration's relationship with Russia. And a lot of that focused in particular on Mike Flynn. Mike Flynn was going to be the incoming national security advisor. And Mike Flynn's actions and behaviors were included in a lot of intelligence documents that were being briefed to senior national security advisors. His identity was masked, it was redacted because he's an American citizen. But there's this complicated process where you can ask for that identity to be revealed. It's called unmasking. And several Obama administration officials did that. They were fully within their rights to do it. They had authority to do it. They followed the proper procedures. But what we're seeing is that process turn into something that Trump wants to make look nefarious. He wants it to make it look like they were after Flynn for political purposes, that they were trying to take him down, before he even got into the job. And conservatives are really rallying around that idea. So I think you're going to see Trump, because his base is so motivated by that idea, talk about this a lot, in the coming weeks and months, probably through the end of the campaign.
So earlier this week, the results of an AP NORC Center for Public Affairs Research survey was released. And it asked people how they felt about the reopen protests that have popped up around the country. Where does the majority of support lie, and just how partisan is that particular issue?
Certainly, we have seen, if you go back in some of our surveys from the last couple of weeks, basically from the start of this pandemic, we've seen a majority of Americans, upwards of 80%, and higher, who supported a lot of the stay-at-home orders. We're starting to see some weakening in support, though the majority of Americans do still remain supportive of these kind of restrictions and a lot of the stay-at-home guidelines. Though again, you are seeing a little bit of movement toward lessening the restrictions, and I think that that's happening for a couple of reasons. One, we have been doing this for a long time, and I think that people are getting tired of it. I mean, I know I am tired of sitting in my house, so I can understand why some people are feeling that way. Two, you do have some locations around the country where the health situation is starting to change, and then three, you have this consistent push from the president and from some Republican governors, to focus on reopening, to really start moving in that direction. And I think taken together, that leads us to a place where, a percentage of Americans are not necessarily in favor of staying at home anymore. But I do think it's important to keep reminding people that the majority actually are supportive of these kind of restrictions.
And not necessarily supportive of the reopen protest, though I think there is also seems to be a flavor of that response that is supportive of Americans being able to protest.
Exactly, right. I mean, there are sort of two things at play here. One, there's just the sort of ability to protest, this, which is, I think, something that Americans of all political stripes actually are very happy to have, and to live in a country where that is something that you can do. At the same time, some of these protests, when you see some of the pictures and some of the video, they are small, but they are quite heated. You have people showing up with guns. You have people, showing up, really angry at the media and really angry at their state and local governments. So again, while they represent, a minority view in this country, they have been quite profound.
Okay, let me see if I can tie the first question and the last question together here.
Yeah.
So much of the, the legitimate stress and angst coming from citizens about the lockdowns has been simply, hey, we're losing our jobs. We're facing an economic crisis here. Absolutely legitimate. So how much of the stimulus package, when you talk about individuals, could be aimed at relieving some of that stress? So people who can't work all of a sudden can feel a little more comfortable about not working.
Yeah, so I think that you want to look at this as a step toward that, but with the reality that it's not enough. If you're someone who has lost your job, and you don't know when that job is coming back, certainly getting, $1,000, $1,200 from the federal government is a huge help. You want that money. It's not enough to replace, the income that you're losing from, a permanent job, especially if you're talking about a situation where, you've also lost your health care and you're trying to figure out, how you're gonna get insurance coverage. So, it's a bridge, I would say. That's how a lot of lawmakers look at this, with the full knowledge that, a lot of people who are in a stressful economic situation right now are having to cobble together a lot of things, unemployment, potentially a check from the government, maybe getting on, a government run healthcare program like the Obamacare exchanges. So it's a real struggle for these people. And I think that, there's a recognition that the government can do a lot, but it can't fully replace, having a full-time job.
Julie Pace is AP's Washington bureau chief. She joins us here on Inside the Outbreak, about once every other week to talk about politics. Thanks for doing it today, Julie. Appreciate the insight, and we will, I'm sure, speak again not too far down the road.
Happy to be here. Always happy to talk with you, Ralph.
At apnews.com, today's One Good Thing feature is a story about a lawyer who's taking a different approach to dealing with the healthcare industry than he usually does. A prominent medical malpractice attorney in Boston has organized a group of well-known local lawyers to raise funds for frontline responders to the COVID-19 crisis. Clyde Bergstresser says he has made a lot of money suing the healthcare industry, and this seems like a good time to give back. Funds are destined for Boston EMS, the city's ambulance service, and Boston Medical Care Center, a safety net hospital serving the city's low-income neighborhoods. You can read that story and all of AP's coronavirus outbreak coverage at apnews.com.
That's it for this episode of Ground Game. We'll be here every step of the way during this extraordinary moment in American politics and American life, giving you all the news you need to know. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of your news, head over to apnews.com.
From the Westwood One Podcast Network.